Welcome to Old World, a 4X turn-based strategy game that combines the political intrigue and character development of Crusader Kings with the 4X strategy that we love from Civilization. And with release of Old World Heroes of the Aegean DLC and the game releasing on Steam today, I thought now would be a great time to share some of the key differences that separate Old World from other, perhaps familiar strategy games like Humankind or Civilization 6. Without any further ado, let's begin. Cities themselves work a little bit differently in Old World than other historical strategy games. You are slightly limited in where you can place them. You have to find these city sites and take them over through military conquest, or hold a unit on it to sort of protect it and make sure that other players can't take it unless they want to declare war with you. Now, when you find a city site though, you do have a little bit of option. A little bit of wiggle room. You can place down the city on any one of these green highlighted tiles when you select your settler. You'll also notice that your borders shift. This will reflect the immediate tiles that you'll be able to work. You can grow these with time, of course, but it's really important when you place a city in Old World. Another thing that I would highly recommend to beginners and expert players alike is to head down and at least have a look at the Show Resources and Improvements overlay. You can shift click it, or hold M to bring it up. I like to just keep it on. Kind of a no-brainer. You can also hold comma to reveal the one underneath it. In this case, though, I'm interested in the resources. And as you can see, as I mouse my settler over the different tiles, I can see all of the different ones I'll get access to. I also know that certain resources require certain technologies. When you mouse over them, you can see those. So maybe trapping the game is less useful early on, but more useful later in the game. A more powerful early city might look to take advantage of these 2 salts. Nearly 3, but I can't quite get them in range. Although perhaps the ultimate balance would be one of these 2 tiles. You can see this one would get horses, this one gets the deer. I'm going to run up this way probably and grab that. Move this way and place my city. The second part of founding a city that really differs from other strategy games in particular is that you have to found it with a family. Now, each civilization in Old World will have access to these 4 different families. In this case, we have riders, landowners, patrons, and traders, and each one will provide their own unique abilities and benefits broadly aligned with what they do. So, for example, if I take the riders here, my cities, rider cities, will always start connected. I'll also produce a little bit more of my training, something I'll talk about later in the video, but basically that lets me promote my units or push them further. So maybe a reasonable start for me. It will depend on your gameplay and your strategy, but by and large, that is what differentiates cities, settling in particular in Old World. Technology in the Old World works a bit differently as well. If you jump into the tech tree when you're prompted to choose a new research, or you can find it with F6 or up here in the top left, you can see that it ranges from ironworking, drama, the spoked wheel, but because the game itself takes place over a relatively small time period, the Old World, we're of course somewhat limited in how far our technologies go. It's concentrated, it's focused, and it's specific. However, the actual unlocks themselves also vary quite a bit. You can see here I need to decide what to research next. General, by the way, and considering this is a video targeted more towards the beginner end, it's a good idea to pick up divination early on to allow you to start building the shrine improvements. Religion is very important in Old World, and if you can get religious pressure and these great bonuses early, that's a good thing. However, you'll also get access to camps and slingers and potentially a free settler if you grab trapping, which is usually the recommended option, also depending on your start, of course, right? Fur from the game, etc. Keep that in mind. What tiles do you have? And of course, stone cutting is fantastic for getting stone online. You can always head to the top of your screen and check just how much science you're earning. You could be earning it from characters. More on that in a minute. I'm earning some from my queen, who happens to have a particular skill in wisdom. Again, more on that later in the video. However, it's important to note that we're picking up some science. Here we're picking up 12. Technologies are slow, and each turn in Old World counts as 1 year. So it can take you maybe 6 to 10 years for a lot of technologies. Bear that in mind. As I develop this early city, it's a great opportunity to mention one of Old World's most unique mechanics. It's down here next to your character, and it's called orders. Your orders rate, in this case, I'm producing 12 of them per turn. And as always, if I hit up here, like any other resource, I can check how I'm earning them, buy more, sell them, so on and so forth. Orders are effectively your currency for taking actions in a turn. Whether it's moving a unit, you can see the number of orders represented here is the number of orders I'll have left. You can change this in settings if you'd like to, but I like to leave it on how many I have left. It's totally fine. Using orders, the further I go, the more I'll use. Fairly self-explanatory. However, other actions also use orders. It's not just moving a unit around. Here, for example, and we'll talk more about characters later, but if I wanted to divorce my wife, it would cost me 2 orders, as well as some of my civics earn. Moving this unit, as I said, costs orders, but more than just that. Setting actions, giving it priorities. Here you can see constructing a farm would use 1 order. Attacking, upgrading, promoting, all of these things use orders. So you have to be very careful about how and where you use your orders in Old World. Let's play through an example as we talk about city development and orders in combination with each other. Here, I'm probably looking to produce a bit of food, but currently not producing a lot. Probably a good idea to get a farm online. You can see the game is recommending it to me. As I select a worker and hover over the yield or the building that I want to build, you can see the yield on all of the different tiles. Very useful for planning out where and what you want to build, right? Super good. So in this case, I can see I probably want to build a farm up this way on a +6, probably somewhere in and around the salt, maybe on the hills. But actually where I'm standing right now is a perfectly fine, not great, but +6 food. So I'll take it. That used up one of my orders, and now he can get to work. I could choose to use orders to go out and explore, right? Here's a random event that I can jump onto. I've become more disciplined, or acquired labor force from it. Neat. Free technology. But this is all using orders. And so it's important to bear in mind that as you move through, you can see I have 2 orders remaining. I could move on to these gems and then use my last order to pillage them, sending some yield back to the base and basically completing my turn. Even though there are units that have been yet to move, I have no orders left, so I can't do anything to them, and I'm forced to end the turn. This is the power of orders in Old World, and one of the key things that really sets this game apart. So in this beginner's video, I would really recommend that you check through carefully how you're getting your orders and prioritize them, because without them, even if your units haven't moved at all and they've got, say, 3 or 4 moves that they could take, you're not going to be able to do anything. And don't forget, whether it's a military move or a worker, like in this case, Old World gives you flexibility. One of the brilliant things about this game, and one of the ways that they perhaps manage some of the complexities, is with a tiny little button down here called Undo Last Move. Control Z, the keyboard shortcut. Basically, if I want to spend some orders, let's say I want to march this worker over towards this city, right? But then I decide, oh crap, I forgot I had to build a mine back here. No fear, head down to the bottom left of your screen and you can simply undo the move. Some people argue it's silly and a waste of time if you think that you don't have to use it. But the beauty of it is, and again, it's entirely up to you how much you'd like to quote unquote abuse it, but you can use it to easily fix misclicks. I accidentally clicked quarry because I wanted to build one here, but my villager was here. Those kind of little things that would normally require a reload don't anymore. However, you can also use it for military maneuvers as well. So if I came over here to fight this unit and then I didn't like it, I could be like, actually, I might just backtrack. Likewise, if you're scouting out in a certain direction, you could also say, let me see what's behind these clouds. Ooh, don't like that. No, thank you. Let's send this guy to look behind these clouds instead. Oh, they're crap too. Okay, you know what? I'll just save my orders. Right, so it's entirely up to you how you want to use it, but very important to note that it exists within the game. Also up the top here, next to some very useful overlays, there's a replay the actions over the last turn. That won't reset anything, but it will sort of replay and show you everything that's happened. Kind of fun. Moving through the early game, you'll likely be spending a lot, but not all of your orders on moving units around. Maybe you're doing what I'm doing here, sending your scouts out to find potential new city sites and resources to harvest. Here I'm going to get 36 bucks by farming these horses. Not bad for a day's work. We'll also, of course, encounter enemies and foes, new players. And again, and I'll talk about this in a bit, but in Old World, these are real players. Each turn is a year, and each character, whether they're an enemy leader or a child of your own, has unique benefits, yields that they provide, character traits, better governors, nerds, or warlords, and opinions, much like Crusader Kings. Again, I'll touch on that more in a little bit, so we might put the Babylonians to one side and focus on the task at hand. In the early game, as I was saying, you're likely to be using through largely controlling your scouts to harvest resources from the world. You can effectively pillage or harvest resources outside of your borders. You can also chop down trees and clear land to buy wood. Not that it's worth that much. Really, though, the strength that I want to highlight here is around other ways that you use your orders and other yields that you want to focus on. In particular, Old World differs through its promotions and generals mechanic. This is neat and definitely worth mentioning because this will be the difference between you winning and losing early fights. You'll notice when I select a unit, we'll start with one warrior. I have two basic things that I can do with my training rate. This is produced or detracted by certain characters, certain traits, but also buildings and improvements, right? You may remember from my workers and from the technologies that we mentioned earlier, there are certain shrines we can build. Some of these will provide yield, and laws and customs and all sorts of other things too. How you use them, though, is really neat. There are broadly two different ways. Firstly, you can assign generals. These are characters who you've either picked up or given birth to. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but the crucial thing to note is you can even assign yourself, and each general has their own different things and abilities. You can see this one provides 6% to damage, critical hit chance, plus 6 experience, and they're immune themselves to critical hits. I think I'll choose this oligarch rather than myself to lead this army. Putting a general on an army will basically mean that that unit can't do anything else this turn. Likewise with the second feature that I'll be discussing in a minute, the promotions. When you do that, it ends their moves. So if you intend to move them first, a little tip, you might want to walk them a couple of tiles, then move in and either add a general, or the second thing, promotions. The second key use of your training rate is promoting. Here, you can see that you can level up through promotions like many other historical games, here leaning heavily on Civilization's promotion mechanic. You'll be familiar with this if you're familiar with Civ 5, although it doesn't have the branching paths of Civilization 6, but you can see that these also lead to further developments. Some of them. Combat 1 leads to Combat 2, for example. These buffs, alongside adding generals to your armies, are really the two key ways that you'll probably be using your training rates, particularly in the early game, although you can also use it to force a march, to force a unit to march a few extra tiles, providing you have the orders on offer. Here you can see this unit has used up all 4 of its sort of action points, all 4 of its moves, but I still have some orders left, so I could choose to spend 100 of my training rate, which is around 5 turns, so wouldn't normally be a good idea. But for demonstration purposes, I could choose to do that, spend some extra orders, and force that march just that little bit further. In this case, obviously, difficult terrain and nothing to go for, not a great move. But I thought I would mention it here as well. You can use your training to push your units further, as well as equipping them to be absolute powerhouses in the battlefield. It's important to note, as I've already mentioned, that Old World also has very, for lack of a better comparison, Crusader Kings mechanics to it. There is a story here. There is a family history and lineage. There are events like this one, where I'm deciding who should be married. Who shall he marry? Shall we pimp off my prince, my warrior, to this one or this one. You can see, and each one has their own characteristics, their own beliefs, their own attributes, right? You can see here, Ayana the Schemer has 4 wisdom, but -3 courage. Not so good for my promotions, for my military, for all of the things that encourage courage. But also, though, very powerful on the wisdom front. So here we see a governor who is very good at science, but very bad at militarism. And this is the same for literally any and every character in the game. Each one you can click into, and depending on who they are and how far through the game you are, you'll also have a variety of options. The most basic ones tend to be to influence, to woo them over, right? You can see here, my queen has a -90 opinion of me. She's pretty upset, right? Whereas my son, first in line to the throne, my grandson, apologies, has a +20. So maybe we can put some effort into him down the line. Accompanying these characters is, of course, the fact that they're all alive in this living world. And while there is definitely a lot of information and text and relationships to manage, you get a feeling that it does have those Crusader Kings elements of politics and intrigue. Here you can see we've met up with a tribe, effectively the kind of city-states on steroids, if you're familiar with Civilization. And we can choose how we should meet them. Depending on our own character traits, our own personality traits, and our skills, sometimes we can also have unique options on how to deal with these events without maintaining a truce, without going to war. But in this case, maintaining the truce, gaining some training, but it requires that I'm either productive, a deal maker, or prosperous. And I, as the 50-year-old king, are none of those things. So instead, I have to take one of these options. I could choose to take legitimacy and go to war, or pay them off to hold the truce. In this case, I think I'll take legitimacy and go to war, because it brings me through nicely into probably the last major thing you'll need to know about this game. We're at war with the Scythians. Great. However, before I move through to that, just one more note on these personality traits. They are really deep and varied and wide-reaching. I've had wonderful stories from, like, my wife who turned out to be a witch, and we had to turn her into a fugitive. To really happy stories, to wonderful tales. It's a wonderful addition to Old World, and it's really one of those key things that sets it apart from other strategy games. And it's important to note that these characters have real impacts as well. Here you can see I'm assigning one to be a governor of a city. This character, as it happens, me, will then use their abilities, as you can see, their characteristics, their traits, to impact the yields, the gain of basically every key character-based resource or unit-based resource, laws and progression in the game. Another thing finally to note here is around legitimacy and victory conditions. Throughout the game, as you form your nation and surge to greatness, you will create and discover ambitions. And as you can see here, you can choose a little bit about which ones you'd like to take. These ambitions are overarching goals. In this case, these early ones have 5 workers or control 6 farms, choosing the effective development cycle, how my empire will become a thing. These ambitions are then aligned, as you can see on the victory condition screen, accessed in the top left. Achieve 10 of your ambitions and win the game. Alternatively, in Old World, you can also win by score, comprised of victory points, largely brought together through your overall ambition and achievement in the game across cities, cultures, wonders, so on and so forth. Of course, you do have another option, which is extermination, one of those key X's to all 4X games. Thank you very much for joining me today. Don't forget you can check all of those things that I discussed up in the top left at any point during your game of Old World, and I will see you next time.